The clouds outside the aircraft window moved like ghosts across an endless blue canvas, and Major Valentina, Phantom, rays traced their shadows with her finger against the cool glass. She'd been watching them for 3 hours now, these civilian clouds, soft and purposeless, nothing like the anvil heads she'd threaded her F-16 through over Kandahar. The business class seat felt wrong against her spine, too soft after years of ejection seats and military transport benches. Her reflection in the window showed tired eyes, civilian clothes that hung strange on her frame, and the faint scar along her jawline that makeup never quite covered. The other passengers dozed or scrolled through phones, oblivious to the woman in 12A who could calculate fuel burn rates in her sleep and knew 17 different ways to recover from an inverted flat spin. The flight attendant had already passed twice with drinks she didn't take. The ice would melt too slow, she'd thought absently, not like the instant crystallization at 30,000 feet in an unpressurized cockpit. That's when the captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, not with the usual dreary announcement about turbulence or descent, but with something that made her straighten in her seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. I need to ask an unusual question. Are there any Air Force officers aboard, particularly anyone with fighter experience?" The words hung in the recycled air like a challenge. Around her, passengers stirred, confused murmurs rippling through the cabin like disturbed water. A few heads turned, searching. Nobody stood. Valentina's hand found the worn edge of her father's challenge coin in her pocket, the one she'd carried through 3 tours, 2 ejections, and 1 court-martial that had ended her career 6 months ago. Not dishonorably, but not with honor either. Medical discharge, they'd called it. Psychological unsuitability for combat operations. The words still tasted bitter. The flight attendant appeared in the aisle, her practiced smile replaced with something raw and urgent. "Please," she said to the cabin, voice just shy of breaking, "if anyone has military aviation experience, we need you." Through the window, Valentina noticed it then. Their shadow on the clouds below was wrong, the angle too steep, the speed bleeding off in a way that made her stomach tighten with familiar dread. This wasn't turbulence, this was trouble. Her fingers found the call button before her mind fully decided. The soft ping seemed to echo through the cabin like a bell tolling. The flight attendant's eyes locked onto hers, hope flooding her features. "Major Valentina Reyes," she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign after months of silence. "United States Air Force. Retired." The woman nearly ran to her, heels clicking against the aisle floor. "Thank God, please come with me, quickly." As Valentina unbuckled her seatbelt, she caught her reflection once more in the window. For just a moment she saw herself as she'd been, helmet under arm, G-suit tight, call sign painted on fuselage. Phantom. Because she could appear and disappear from radar, from combat zones, from everything except her own memories. The cockpit door was already open when they reached it, a violation of every protocol she knew, which told her everything about the severity of the situation. Captain Morrison turned in his seat and she saw immediately what was wrong. His co-pilot was slumped forward, unconscious or worse, and Morrison's own face had the gray pallor of someone fighting to stay conscious. "Food poisoning," he gasped. "Both of us, same meal, I'm losing it fast." His hands shook on the yoke. "Can you fly?" The question almost made her laugh. Could she fly? She'd landed an F-16 with half her hydraulics gone and her canopy spiderwebbed from bird strike. She'd brought home aircraft held together by nothing but aluminum prayers and pure will. But this was a 737, 200 souls aboard, and she'd never touched anything this large. "I can fly anything with wings," she said, sliding into the co-pilot's seat, her hands already moving across unfamiliar panels, finding what she needed by instinct and elimination. "What's your fuel state?" Morrison blinked at her military terminology, then translated. "4 hours. We're 2 hours out of Denver." She nodded, fingers dancing across the autopilot panel, verifying their heading, altitude, speed. The aircraft was stable for now, but Morrison was fatting fast. She could see it in the way his eyes couldn't focus, the tremor in his jaw. "Listen to me," she said, voice dropping into the command tone that had once made lieutenants snap to attention. "You're going to talk me through your systems. Every warning light, every gauge that matters, then you're going to rest. I've got this. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw him take in the scar, the steady hands, the way she'd already identified their position on the navigation display without being told. Who are you? Valentina allowed herself a thin smile. Someone who's really good at impossible situations. She keyed the radio muscle memory guiding her fingers. Denver Center, this is United 447. We have a medical emergency. Both pilots are incapacitated. I'm Major Valentina Reyes, Air Force fighter pilot, assuming control of the aircraft. Request immediate vectors for approach and all available assistance. The pause on the other end felt eternal. Then, United 447 Denver Center, copy your emergency. Stand by for assistance. Can you confirm your flight experience? She could feel Morrison watching her, along with the flight attendant who stood frozen in the doorway. 200 passengers behind that door, trusting in wings and engines, and someone they didn't even know was now responsible for their lives. Denver Center, I have over 3,000 hours in F-16s, combat certified, instructor qualified. I've never flown commercial, but I understand physics and I don't quit. Get me someone who can talk me through the differences, and I'll put this bird on your runway. Morrison's hand found her shoulder, weak but reassuring. The landing gear, he whispered. Different than what you're used to. And the reversers. His eyes rolled back and he slumped in his harness. She was alone now, truly alone, at the controls of an unfamiliar aircraft with more souls aboard than she'd ever been responsible for. The radio crackled back to life. United 447, we're patching you through to Colonel James Thompson, F-15 pilot with 737 type rating. He'll walk you through this. The voice that came next was deep, assured, tinged with Texas drawl. Major Reyes, this is Colonel Thompson. Heard you're having an interesting day. Let's get you and those folks home. Relief flooded through her, but she kept her voice steady. Copy that, Colonel. I'm all ears. The flight attendant, her name tag read Monica, leaned in. The passengers don't know yet. Should I tell them? Valentina considered for a heartbeat. Tell them we have a medical situation with the crew and that a qualified pilot is in control. Nothing more. Keep them calm. Monica nodded and disappeared. Through the cockpit speakers, she could hear Thompson beginning his litany of differences between fighter and commercial aircraft. She absorbed every word, her mind cataloging, categorizing, building a new mental model over the old one. The 737 was a bus compared to her F-16, but it was an honest bus, responsive in its own way. She could feel it through the yoke, the massive momentum of it, the way it wanted to stay stable. Your approach speed is going to feel like you're crawling, Thompson was saying. Trust the numbers. Don't try to fly it like a Viper. Copy, she replied, adjusting their heading slightly as Denver Center vectored them for a long, straight approach. They wanted to give her as much time and space as possible. Smart. Through the side window, she could see other aircraft being diverted around them, their contrails bending away like schools of fish avoiding a shark. She wasn't a shark, though. She was a ghost, a phantom, someone who shouldn't even be here. The medical board had said she couldn't fly anymore, that the trauma of her last mission, the one where she'd watched her wingman's aircraft disintegrate in a ball of fire while she could do nothing but evade, had broken something essential in her. They'd grounded her, taken her wings, sent her home to a life of watching clouds from passenger seats. But here she was, hands steady on controls she'd never touched before, because when everything goes wrong, training takes over. And Valentina Reyes had been trained by the best, forged in fire over hostile skis, shaped by GS that would crush ordinary people. United 447, begin descent to flight level 240, Denver Center instructed. She pulled the throttles back slightly, feeling the engines respond, the nose dipping gently. It was different from the immediate response of a fighter, more like guiding a ship than dancing with the sky. But physics was physics. Lift, drag, thrust, weight. The four forces that ruled everything that flew, from hummingbirds to helicopters to this massive people, mover she now commanded. How you doing up there, Major? Thompson's voice carried a note of concern. Steady as she goes, Colonel, though I'd kill for a HUD right about now. His laugh was warm. Yeah, you're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. But from what I'm hearing about your record, you've forgotten more about flying than most pilots ever learn. Her record. She wondered how much they'd pulled, how much they knew. The classified missions, the Silver Star, the day she'd volunteered to fly into a sandstorm to evacuate wounded Marines when everyone else said it was suicide. Passing through flight level 280, she reported, the altitude tape scrolling down steadily. Morrison stirred slightly in his seat but didn't wake. She'd managed to get him properly secured in his harness, though the effort had cost her precious seconds of divided attention. Behind her, through the reinforced door, she could hear the low murmur of passengers. Monica had done her job well. There was concern but not panic. They trusted that someone competent was in control. They had no idea their lives rested in the hands of someone the Air Force had deemed too damaged to fly. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been escorted from her squadron, wings clipped, career ended not in a blaze of glory but in a psychologist's quiet office. Post-traumatic stress, they'd said. Survivor's guilt. As if guilt was something you could just process and file away. As if watching Marcus burn, hearing his last transmission, his voice so calm as he reported his engine failure, was something she could simply move past. "You're doing great," Thompson said, as if reading her mind. "Just keep flying the aircraft. Everything else is noise." Noise, like the phantom echo of Marcus's voice she still heard sometimes, like the whispers that had followed her through her last months of service. Like the doubt that crept in during the small hours, wondering if the medical board had been right, if she really was broken. But broken things could still function. Sometimes they were all you had. "Denver Center, United 447 requesting weather at field," she transmitted. "United 447, winds 270 at 12, visibility 10 miles, few clouds at 8,000. You've got clear skies waiting for you." Clear skies. She'd spent her career in anything but. Desert storms that turned day to night. Mountain valleys where the wind could slam you into granite without warning. Combat zones where the sky itself became the enemy, full of missiles and tracers and death. This should be easy, should be. The throttles felt different under her hands than the F-16's single-engine control. Everything was multiplied, twice the engines, 10 times the mass, 50 times the souls depending on her. She made a minor adjustment to their descent rate, feeling the aircraft respond with ponderous grace. "Talk me through the landing gear," she said to Thompson. "I know the concept's the same, but the speeds, the drag profile." "Gear extension speed is 270 knots indicated," Thompson replied immediately. "You'll feel significant drag, more than you're used to. The aircraft will want a balloon, counter with forward pressure and power adjustment." She filed it away, building her mental model of the landing sequence. In her Viper, she could throw the gear out at 300 knots if she needed to, using it as a speed brake in combat descents. This beast had rules, procedures, limits that existed for good reason. "Passing through flight level 200, she announced. Denver was coming up fast now, though fast was relative when you were used to supersonic. The Rockies sprawled below, snow-capped and indifferent. She'd flown through valleys between these peaks at night, using terrain-following radar, trusting technology and training to thread the needle between stone and sky. This was different but not harder, just different. "Major," Monica's voice from behind, carefully controlled. "Some passengers are asking questions. They can see we're descending early." Valentina grabbed the intercom without looking back. "Tell them we're being given priority approach due to the medical situation." Another half-truth to add to her collection. Like telling her commander she was fine after Marcus died. Like telling the medical board she understood their decision. Like telling herself that watching clouds from 12A would be enough. The radio interrupted her thoughts. "United 447, turn left heading 090, descend to 15,000. She banked the aircraft gently, feeling the mass of it resist then comply. It was like dancing with a giant, every move deliberate and measured. No yanking and banking here, no 9G pulls that turned the world gray at the edges. Just steady, controlled inputs that respected the physics of scale. "Colonel, what's your take on using Autoland?" she asked Thompson. She knew the 737 had the capability, but she also knew automated systems could be finicky, especially when you didn't fully understand their logic. In your shoes, I'd hand fly it, he replied immediately. You've got good weather and you need to feel what this bird's telling you. Automation's great until it isn't, and you don't have time to learn its quirks. She appreciated his honesty. In combat, she'd learned to trust her instincts over computers when things got complicated. The machine could process faster, but it couldn't feel the subtle wrongness in a vibration, couldn't sense the ambush in an empty sky. United 447, descend to 10,000, speed your discretion. She pulled the throttles back further, letting gravity help. The engine spooled down to a whisper, and for a moment the cockpit was almost peaceful. Morrison's breathing had steadied, still unconscious but stable. The sun was setting behind them, painting the instrument panel gold. In a different world, this might have been beautiful. You got anyone waiting for you in Denver? Thompson asked, the question seemingly casual but loaded with purpose. He was keeping her grounded, human, connected to something beyond the immediate crisis. No, she replied, then caught herself. Well, my dad, he's probably wondering why I'm late. Her father, who'd pinned her wings on her when she graduated flight school, who'd been there when they took them away, who still called her Phantom when everyone else just called her Val. He'll be proud of what you're doing today, Thompson said. Proud. The word sat heavy. Would he be proud that his grounded daughter had to steal one more flight, one more chance to matter? Or would he see what she saw, someone so desperate to fly again that she'd volunteered for an impossible situation? Approaching 10,000, she reported, pushing the thoughts away. The aircraft leveled off smoothly. Denver sprawled ahead, the airport visible now in the evening light. She could see the runway, impossibly long and wide compared to the tactical strips she was used to. Room for error, but also room for doubt. Let's talk about your approach speeds, Thompson said, all business now. You're going to target 137 knots on final. It'll feel wrong, trust me. Every instinct from flying fighters will scream you're too slow. He was right. In her F-16, 137 knots was barely flying. Here, with flaps and the massive wing area of the 737, it was the sweet spot between controlled flight and efficient stopping distance. Flap schedule, she asked, already reaching for the lever. Flaps 1 at 210, flaps 5 at 190, Thompson recited. Then you'll go flaps 15 at 170, 30 at 160 for landing. She repeated it back, committing it to memory. In combat, you memorized abort sequences and weapons parameters. This was just another kind of combat, fought against physics and time instead of enemy aircraft. United 447, turn left heading 045, descend to 8,000. You're number 1 for approach, runway 26 left. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Standing by. She could picture them, fire trucks, ambulances, crews ready for the worst. She'd seen enough crash responses to know what they were preparing for. The controlled chaos, the foam trucks ready to spray, the medical teams hopping they wouldn't be needed but ready if they were. She'd been on both sides of that equation, the one needing rescue and the one providing it. Copy, 045 descending to 8,000, she responded, voice steady as granite. The turn brought Denver full into view, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere down there, hundreds of families were going about their evening routines, unaware that above them a ghost was flying again. Flaps 1, she announced, moving the lever. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the leading-edge devices extended, increasing lift and drag. The speed began to bleed off naturally, and she compensated with a touch of power. It was a delicate balance, energy management on a scale she'd never dealt with before. Morrison groaned, his eyes fluttering open briefly. Status, he managed to croak. On approach to Denver, she told him. 5 minutes out, rest. I've got this. He looked at her with eyes that couldn't quite focus, saw something that made him nod slightly, then faded back into unconsciousness. Trust from a stranger, based on nothing but competence projected through steady hands and steadier voice. You're doing beautifully, Thompson said in her ear. Just remember, this bird wants to land. Don't fight it, work with it. Working with it. Like she'd learned to work with fear instead of against it. Like she'd learned to work with grief, carrying it but not letting it fly the aircraft. The 737 was honest in its responses, telegraphing its intentions through subtle pitch changes and power requirements. Flaps 5, she announced at 190 knots, feeling the additional drag, adjusting power to maintain glide slope. The airport grew larger, runway lights bright against the darkening landscape. She could see the precision approach path indicators now, 4 lights that would guide her to the proper glide slope. 3 red, 1 white, slightly low. She added power, watched them shift to 2 and 2. Perfect. United 447 cleared visual approach runway 26 left. Winds calm, cleared to land. How many times had she heard those words? But never like this, never with civilians in the back, never in an aircraft that weighed more than a small building. The runway looked impossibly far away still, but she knew that was the illusion of size. Her F-16 would have covered this distance in seconds. The 737 would take its time, descending toward Earth with the patience of geology. "Gear down," she announced at 5 miles, reaching for the lever. The sound was different than she expected, a hydraulic groan followed by the rumble of massive wheels extending into the slipstream. 3 green lights illuminated, the most beautiful lights in aviation, confirming all gear down and locked. The drag was tremendous, like someone had thrown an anchor out the back. She compensated with power, feeling the engines respond. Behind her, through the door, she heard the change in noise register with the passengers. They knew they were landing now, could feel it in the configuration changes, the deck angle, the way the aircraft had shifted from cruise to approach. "Flaps 15, she called, watching the speed tape unwind toward 170. Each configuration change required adjustment, anticipation, feeling the aircraft's new personality emerge with each addition of lift and drag. The runway was clear now, every detail visible. She could see the threshold markings, the touchdown zone markers at 1,000 feet, the VASI lights confirming her glide slope. In her peripheral vision, the emergency vehicles waited, lights flashing but sirens silent. They were ready for her to fail, but she could feel it now. This aircraft wanted to land, wanted to return to Earth as much as she'd once wanted to stay airborne forever. "Flaps 30, she announced, the final configuration. 160 knots, stabilized approach on speed on glide slope. The training was taking over now, not Air Force training but something deeper, the fundamental understanding of flight that transcended aircraft types. Lift equals weight, thrust equals drag, and every landing is just a controlled collision with a planet. 1,000 feet, Monica called from behind, playing the role of pilot monitoring since Morrison couldn't. "Stabilized," Valentina replied automatically. The runway rushed up now, perspective shifting from approach to landing. She could see the rubber marks from thousands of previous landings, the proof that this was possible, routine even, except nothing about today was routine. 500, Monica called. The ground proximity warning system remained silent. She was where she needed to be. Thompson had gone quiet, letting her fly, trusting her to feel her way through this final phase. The phantom voice of Marcus whispered in her memory, "Trust your instincts, Val. The aircraft will tell you everything you need to know." 100, Monica's voice tight with tension. 50. The radar altimeter counting down their altitude above the runway. 30. She pulled the power to idle, feeling the nose want to drop. 20. A gentle pull on the yoke, raising the nose, entering the flare. 10. The ground effect cushioned them, the aircraft floating on its own pressure wave. The main wheels kissed the pavement so gently she almost didn't feel it, just heard the subtle squeak of rubber meeting concrete. She held the nose up, aerodynamic braking, then lowered it gently to the runway. The reversers deployed with a roar, throwing everyone gently forward against their restraints. She'd never used reversers before, fighters didn't have them, but the concept was simple enough. Redirect thrust forward, let Newton's laws do the work. The aircraft slowed dramatically, speed tape unwinding toward taxi speed. She found the toe brakes, different from her fighter's single brake pedal, but intuitive enough. The 737 responded obediently, slowing, turning off at the first available taxiway as directed by ground control. And then they were stopped. Engines running, aircraft intact, everyone breathing. She sat for a moment, hands still on the controls, feeling the adrenaline she'd been suppressing flood through her system. Behind her, the cabin erupted in applause, the sound carrying through the reinforced door. Monica was crying, laughing, hugging her against the jump seat. Morrison's eyes opened, focused this time, taking in their position on the taxiway. "Did you just?" he started. "Yeah," she said simply. "Welcome to Denver," the radio crackled. "United 447, outstanding job. Emergency vehicles are approaching. Shut down when ready." But it was Thompson's voice she heard clearest, warm with professional pride. "Major Reyes, that was textbook. Actually better than textbook. That was art." Art, she'd been called many things: phantom, ace, natural pilot, and later, damaged, grounded, unfit for duty. But never an artist. The emergency vehicles surrounded them now, their lights painting the cockpit in alternating red and white. Paramedics would be coming aboard soon, taking care of Morrison and his co-pilot. There would be reports, investigations, probably media attention she didn't want. But for this moment, sitting in an unfamiliar cockpit having done the impossible, she felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months whole. She pulled out her father's challenge coin, running her thumb over the worn surface. On one side, the Air Force wings. On the other, a simple phrase: aim high. She'd aimed for the ground today and hit it perfectly. "Major," Morrison said weakly, his hand finding her shoulder again. "I don't know how to thank you." She thought about it, about what she'd gained and lost, about the clouds she'd been watching from 12A that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "You just did," she said. "You let me fly." Through the windscreen, she could see the terminal, passengers already gathering at windows, phones out, recording the aircraft that had made the news. Tomorrow her story would be everywhere, the grounded pilot who saved the day. They'd want to know why she was grounded, what had happened, whether she'd fly again. But those were tomorrow's problems. Tonight she was just a pilot who'd done her job, even if it wasn't her job anymore. The coin caught the emergency lights, seeming to pulse with life. Her father would be proud, she realized. Not because she'd been a hero, but because she'd remembered who she was when it mattered most. Phantom. The ghost who appeared when needed, who moved through impossible situations like they were home. "Ground, United 447, she transmitted. "Request taxi to gate when medical is complete." And "Thanks for the help. United 447, you're cleared to taxi to gate A12 when ready. And Major, the help was all yours. We just watched." She began the shutdown checklist as the paramedics boarded, working through items Thompson called out, each switch and lever a small goodbye to this borrowed bird that had trusted her enough to come home. The engines spooled down to silence, and with them, something in her chest that had been wound tight for 6 months finally released. Later, there would be interviews with the NTSB, the FAA, probably the Air Force, wondering if they'd made a mistake. There would be job offers from airlines, requests to speak at conferences, people wanting to understand how a fighter pilot had transitioned seamlessly to commercial aviation under the worst possible circumstances. But she already knew the answer. Flying was flying. Whether you were threading an F-16 through a canyon at Mach 1, or bringing a 737 home full of families and dreams, the sky didn't care about your credentials or your trauma or what any medical board said. It only cared that you understood its rules and respected its power. As the passengers deplaned, many stopped to look toward the cockpit, some applauding, some crying, all understanding they'd been part of something extraordinary. Monica stood in the doorway, refusing to leave until Valentina was ready. "They want to know your name," she said softly. "The passengers, the media, everyone." Valentina stood, legs surprisingly steady, and looked back at the cockpit one last time. The empty seats, the dark instruments, the weight of what had just happened and what it meant. "Tell them," she said, "tell them Phantom brought them home." The walk through the terminal was surreal, passengers pointing, airport staff applauding, cameras everywhere. But Valentina moved through it all like she'd moved through clouds, present but untouchable, already thinking about what came next. Her phone buzzed, her father, who must have seen the news. She didn't answer yet. She'd call him when she was ready to explain that she'd flown again, that for 40 minutes she'd been complete, that maybe the medical board had been wrong or maybe they'd been right. But it didn't matter because when lives were on the line, broken people could still fly. Security escorted her to a quiet room where officials waited. FAA, airline representatives, even someone from the Air Force who looked like he'd been pulled from dinner. They had questions, so many questions, but she answered them all with the same steady voice she'd used on the radio, professional and detached. Yes, she'd assessed the situation. Yes, she understood the risks. No, she hadn't hesitated. The Air Force representative, a brigadier general she didn't recognize, watched her carefully throughout. When the others finally left, he remained. "Major Reyes," he said slowly, "that was extraordinary work today." She waited. There was always a but with generals. "Your medical discharge," he continued, studying a tablet, "PTSD, survivor's guilt, declared unfit for combat operations." He looked up. "Yet you just performed under extreme pressure with perfect clarity." "It wasn't combat," she replied simply. "There was no enemy, just physics." He leaned back, considering. "The board might review your case given today's events. Would you want that, to fly again officially?" The question hung between them like a held breath. 6 months ago, she would have said yes instantly, desperately. Now, having tasted flight again, having proven to herself that she could still do it, the answer felt more complex. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Today was necessary, but that doesn't mean I'm fixed. It just means I can function when I have to." The general nodded, understanding more than she expected. "The offer stands," he said, leaving his card. The Air Force could use someone who functions that well under pressure, combat or otherwise. When everyone finally left, she sat alone in the quiet room, processing. Through the window, she could see aircraft taking off and landing, the eternal rhythm of aviation continuing. Her phone buzzed again, a message from a number she didn't recognize. It was Thompson, the colonel who talked her through it. "Heard you're considering flying again. For what it's worth, after today, I'd fly with you anywhere." Phantom's a good call sign. Ghosts have a way of appearing when they're needed most. She smiled, the first genuine smile in months. Tomorrow she'd have to decide about the future, about whether to fight for reinstatement or find a new path. But tonight she'd saved 200 lives with hands the Air Force had said were too damaged to trust. She'd found herself in an unfamiliar cockpit and discovered she hadn't lost as much as she'd thought. The terminal was quieting now, the excitement fading to normal evening operations. She stood, straightened her civilian clothes that had seemed so wrong this morning, and walked toward the exit. Her father would be waiting, probably with questions and concern and pride all mixed together. As she passed Gate A12, she saw the 737 still parked there, maintenance crews already swarming over it, preparing it for its next flight. It looked ordinary now, just another aircraft in an endless fleet. But she knew better. That aircraft had been her redemption, her proof that some part of her still worked right. She'd been watching clouds from 12A, a passenger in her own life, when the captain's call had changed everything. One moment of need, one decision to answer, and suddenly she was Phantom again, not grounded but soaring, not broken but essential. The automatic doors opened to Denver's evening air, crisp and clear. Somewhere above, she could hear the whine of engines, another aircraft beginning its approach. The pilot would be following the same procedures she'd just learned, trusting training and physics and the honest nature of aircraft that wanted to fly. Her phone rang, her father this time. She answered. "Val." "My God, I saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm okay, Dad," she said, and meant it for the first time in months. "I flew today, really flew." His silence said everything, the weight of understanding between two pilots who knew what wings meant. Finally, "Want to tell me about it?" "Yeah," she said, finding her rental car in the parking structure. "But Dad, call me Phantom, that's who flew today." The drive home was quiet, the radio full of news about the emergency landing, speculation about the mystery pilot who'd saved the day. They got some details wrong, added drama where none was needed, missed the real story entirely. It wasn't about heroics or split-second decisions or any of the Hollywood narrative they were constructing. It was about muscle memory that survived trauma, about competence that persisted through damage, about finding out that grounded didn't mean worthless. Her apartment felt different when she arrived, though nothing had changed. The same sparse furniture, the same boxes she hadn't unpacked from the move, the same photographs from her Air Force days carefully turned face down. But she turned them up now, one by one. Her squadron, her aircraft. Marcus, grinning beside his jet the day before he died. The images didn't hurt the same way. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it had context now. She'd carried that pain into the cockpit today and still functioned. It was part of her, but not all of her. Her laptop chimed with emails, interview requests, job offers, messages from old squadron mates who'd recognized her name in the news. She ignored them all except one, from an address she recognized. Her former wing commander, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, who'd fought against her medical discharge and lost. Val, saw what you did today. Always knew they were wrong about you. The board's reconvening next week. If you want back in, say the word. Your squadron kept your helmet, it's still in your locker, waiting. Mitch, her helmet with Phantom painted on the side with the hundreds of hours it had protected her through. She could picture it exactly, could almost feel its weight, the familiar squeeze of the mask, the way the world looked through its visor. But that was tomorrow's decision. Tonight she opened her window and listened to the aircraft passing overhead, each one carrying its own cargo of stories and souls. She'd been cargo this morning, passive and transported. For 40 minutes this afternoon, she'd been crew again, essential and alive. The local news at 10 led with her story, using her official Air Force photo from before everything went wrong. She looked younger in it, undamaged, certain about everything. They'd found someone who'd been on the flight, a businessman who described the landing as impossibly smooth and the pilot as absolutely calm. They didn't know about her hands shaking afterward, about the weight of those lives, about the voice of her dead wingman that had guided her through the hardest parts. Her phone rang again. Thompson. I'm not calling too late, he said. Just wanted to check in. How you holding up? Processing, she admitted. It doesn't feel real yet. It will probably hit you in a couple days. When it does, remember, you didn't just save those people, you saved yourself. I've seen a lot of pilots lose their way after being grounded. You found yours at 37,000 feet. After the call, she sat in the dark, thinking about paths and choices. The Air Force wanted her back, but did she want to go? Commercial aviation was opening doors, but was that who she was? The answer, she realized, wasn't either-or. She was Phantom, the ghost who appeared when needed. Maybe that meant returning to fighters, maybe it meant teaching others to fly.